I do. I mean, I think it's very difficult to learn lessons when you're doing things like that and then not carry them into everyday life. It would be ridiculous, wouldn't it? I mean, I think that particular episode of 60 Days on an Island, I struggled the whole way through. I think that's why it made actually it's the TV program that I'm the most proud of. It was the most authentic, and I don't think anyone really knew whether it was possible to dump someone on an island. And remember, I didn't have any food or water or clothes or a knife or a mosquito net or anything. And it was just, it was bonkers actually. And nobody knew if I'd do it. And obviously there was a satellite phone. So if things got terrible, which it was wrapped up in cellophane that I wasn't allowed to open, but I could call for help. So it was safe. But I remember thinking initially, it's going to take a couple of weeks and I'll get lonely. And the moment that they dropped me off and the boat sped off past the reef, I felt like I was going to be sick on the beach. I just utterly overwhelmed, and I couldn't really quite work out why my brain wasn't functioning. But I think reflectively looking back on it, we're very, very accustomed to leaning on other people for all sorts of different reasons, for our whole sense of self. You tell a joke, you walk into a room, you tell a joke, people laugh, therefore you're funny because you've just told a funny joke. But suddenly if there's no one there, you get no feedback at all. And I think the concept that I was, for the first time ever, utterly responsible for my food, for my warmth at night, for absolutely everything, was just literally just sent me into panic mode. And I stayed in that panic mode for quite a few days actually. It took a while to find my feet and really gather my thoughts. And if I think weirdly being naked also made me extraordinarily more vulnerable. It was a bit of a marketing stunt for TV, obviously, to prove that you'd got nothing up your sleeve, etc. But if I'd gone on with a pair of boots and a pair of trousers and a jacket, I could have run around the island, quite proactively sorting stuff out. But I just felt like a prat. I'm not one of these rugby. I do play rugby, but I'm not one of these rugby players who goes into bars and takes all their clothes off. I think nothing could be more horrific as far as I'm concerned. And so I just felt utterly vulnerable, utterly pathetic actually. And it took a real while to find my feet with the whole thing. I mean, I could go on and on, but initially it was very difficult.
And when you say pathetic, because I mean, another thing we want to talk to you about is like your skills from a wilderness point of view as well. I can imagine myself or Lydia or another person going to that with like actually no tools to deal with. I mean, you say you had no knife, but you had loads of skills, whereas most of us kind of don't have that. Did that not make you feel like, okay, I've got something that I can do here? I mean, what did you make your first clothes out of actually? Or did you make clothes?
Well, okay. I think the first thing to understand is this was the first survival experiment I'd ever done. So I'd walked the length of the Amazon, but I walked the length of the Amazon with a rucksack with a lighter in it and a hammock in it and a sleeping bag in it and packed with food. And, and there had been times when we'd run out of food and we had to, fish for piranhas and stuff like that. So I kind of was breaking the sort of the edge of it in terms of a little bit of understanding, but I was no expert. I mean, before I went on the island, it got commissioned, and then I went, I should learn how to light a fire with 2 sticks. Really, should learn now, because that would be a good thing to know. And therefore, I was definitely not an expert. And again, I think that was why it was a successful program, because it was far more like a layman. What would you do in a survival situation if you got washed up on a beach? I do, however, think that it's sorry, my niece just come in. Fliss, can you leave me? I'm doing a podcast. Sorry.
All good. Hello to the users.
I've lost my train of thought now, but essentially, I was definitely not an expert, and I did have some of the skills, but I'd learned them quite recently, so they weren't ingrained skills that I could just, if Ray Mears had been dropped off on that island, it probably wouldn't have been as entertaining, because he could literally just sort himself out. But I don't think that is realistic. Most people don't have all those survival skills anymore. But it isn't. I don't actually think it's the hard survival skills, the fire lighting and stuff like that make you thrive in those situations. I think it's far more the mental side, the psychological side, in terms of being composed, in terms of gathering yourself, in terms of, and that was the stuff that I didn't actually know anything about. I'd spent walking the Amazon, having sort of wars in my brain,
Right, it is.
I think what's really interesting is that you did these things, like these big kind of survival things or expeditions, and like you were saying, you were kind of a fairly typical bloke going into them, and a lot of people who were viewing those things would think of them as kind of blokey, masculine things to do. And yet the thing that was the takeaway from it wasn't like, I am man, I can survive. It was like, oh, I think I know myself like a little bit better, and these are the tools that I have. And I think from so many of the people that we've spoken to who've been through extraordinary experiences, they felt like coming out of it, it was like the dissemination of the idea of who they thought they were, or what it was that they were, that led them to this point of, well, what am I and what's important in my life? And I think that that's really relevant now, because so many guys and women, but especially guys, from what I'm hearing, have lost their jobs now. They were the provider in their family. Their sense of purpose was from that. They were going out to work all day long, and they had these things that they're doing, maybe sport or different things that they're doing outside of that. And now suddenly they're at home and they're sitting at home all day long, and maybe their partner's working and they're not working. And it's that sense of isolation that's the problem, because they're going, well, who am I? What are the important things in my life?
I mean,
totally. Identity.
When I did, and I don't know whether everyone's got this, because I mean, I was adopted, and so I had a few issues going on to the island that I wasn't aware of. But one of the things that subsequently came out in the therapy was I had been living my life based on is termed, I think it's called, a reflective sense of self. So like if you walk into a room and you tell a joke and people laugh, then you know you're funny. Or if you walk the Amazon and everyone tells you you're super tough, then you know you're super tough, you know. And literally that was probably why I did it. It's comical, isn't it, to give up 2.5 years of your life just to prove to everyone that you're tough. But you know, the brain works in a funny way, doesn't it? And I think, you know, to suddenly then go on an island and a bit like people losing their jobs, I suppose, there was no one around me. So there was no one to tell me that I was going to be okay. There was no one to tell me that, you know, I was being an idiot. There was no one to tell me that, you know, to buck my ideas up or even share a joke with or anything. And I had to literally, and it took a long time to work through this, but I just went, well, I need to decide who I am then, don't I? I need to decide what my morals are. You know, do I want to be the sort of person who is, you know, flaky and doesn't turn up for stuff if they say they do, or do I want to be dependable and reliable, or do I want to be honest? Do I want to cheat on people, or do I want to, you know, all my relationships to be deep and honest? And I had to sort of make it up, and I thought, this is nuts. I'm making all of these things up, and I was like, yeah, but you're you, aren't you? You know, I'm me. So it is up to me to decide what I'm like. And it sounds ridiculous, but and I don't know whether many people do. I mean, I quite stereotypically male, I think, and a little bit because of the cultures that I grew up in, rugby and the military and stuff. I drank a lot, you know, to get through periods where you just don't really feel good. You have a beer and the world is right again. And yet again, without any of those distractions, without Facebook or beer or cigarettes or chocolate or whatever your tipple is, you're suddenly left with this incredibly brutally honest version of yourself, because there's nowhere to hide at all. And I think that again is what people who maybe have latched on to an identity as a provider, and I'm in exactly the same boat in that respect. I mean, we're lucky in many ways. We live in a lovely house and stuff like that, but I haven't done any TV work since the year before last now, so it's getting a bit twitchy, you know. And you know, when you've got two twin girls who are now just about 5 months, you know, we need to, you know, we need to start thinking about how we're going to do it. Are we going to Airbnb there's a couple of rooms in the house out, that type of thing, because we need an income. So I do understand it in terms of the sort of psychology, in terms of the survival situation, but also in terms of the current situation. It's a very difficult thing to divorce yourself from. If I'm not the provider, then I'm useless. But I think having the ability to step back from it and seeing those sort of seeing those identities that we put on ourselves, I think it makes it a little bit easier to then go, look, I trust myself that I'm doing my best, that every situation that I'm presented with, I make an honest and decent decision, and I do the best I can. And like, who can do any more than that? You know, who can, as long as you're being honest with the people you're talking to, and at every point when you're having to make a decision, you're making the best one that you possibly can, then I think then you start to build up, and then things go right for you, and then you start to build up confidence, but it's in a much more self-aware, positive manner, isn't it? Because you're building your confidence up, which is genuine, rather than relying on how many people have liked your last Instagram post or something flaky like that. But it's a hard thing to go through. I'm not really, I suppose I am a navel gazer in some respects, but I do think that, you know, that's a bit of an unfair term, isn't it? It's a bit of an old school term, really. But I think we all have to do work on ourselves in order to be the best version of ourselves, in order to then be a decent part of a family and a friend group and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah.
And so with your kids now, and I'd imagine you'd probably be reflecting on this from your own upbringing, schooling, how culture was around you when you were growing up, did you feel that you got the sort of resources or were given any sort of resource to become an authentic human as you were growing up? And if not, what are you going to put into your kids' childhood to make sure that they can design their own symbols, like rather than building, castles on the sand, essentially, which is what, unfortunately, I feel like a lot of us do.
No, I didn't. I think things were, adoption's a funny thing, again, but I think it just exaggerates things that a lot of people have going on in their lives anyway, actually. So although I had an exaggerated version of it, I think, that basically the theory is that if a child is separated from its mother at birth, it's, a child can't fend for itself, can't feed itself or anything. So it's a trauma that is the equivalent of death. It's that big for the baby. It sounds melodramatic, but of course it is, because it's the only thing it can do to stay alive. And so you're then, one of the ways of the theory is that one of the ways that children adapt is to just basically put their own self on hold and please other people. So you end up being a people pleaser. So you're trying to make all of the people around you like you because you're in this sort of weird state of being abandoned. And so and I think then, weirdly, because I would be prepared to do anything for other people, I put my own sort of wants and desires on hold. That led to a very shaky sense of self, very, very shaky sense of who I was. And I then went to boarding school, which some might say was really lucky. I would never send my child to boarding school. I think it was, that lack of parental guidance, and we would do whatever we wanted to do at boarding school. It was a little bit Lord of the Flies. It was quite old school. I'm sure they've improved nowadays. I don't want to knock the current schooling system because I don't know enough about it. My kids are, the oldest one's 3, so we haven't got into that yet. But I think I don't think it was a healthy environment. I don't think anyone encouraged us to talk about our feelings. I think it was there were no morals. What I would do to rectify that, for example, with my little boy, which I already do, is like we're talking all the time, and communication can be over-egged, I think, in terms of just communication is the answer to everything. I don't think it is, but I think having that loving relationship, giving him enough time so that you really do understand him, so that you're not creating this chasm, and I never had the ability really to chat to my dad. He wasn't, he was quite old school, quite Victorian in many ways, and my mum was more approachable, but I don't think parents back then had the kind of awareness about psychology. I remember my sister had tantrums, for example, and back then that was deemed to be naughty, and she was shouted at for having tantrums, and then every night for fucking 6 years there were doors being slammed and people screaming at each other, and that I don't think that happens as much in families today, because if a child starts behaving in a way that is causing concern for the parents, they step back and go, what are we doing wrong? What are we doing that is not enabling this child to thrive in the way they could? And so I just think, I don't think it's rocket science. I just do think it's a degree of care that we're aware enough now to be able to give, I suppose. We're all busy and we've all got lives that are ridiculously hectic, and we should give more time to our children. But I think that connection is everything, isn't it? Once you lose that, once your child is just making things up as they go along, and not having that guidance. And I do think, I'm not a disciplinarian, but I just think it's being there enough so that you can just make gentle tweaks to the direction of a child's life, rather than having to, come down like a sledgehammer all of the time. And I think for me that's my version of how I'm going to sort of not make the same mistakes that I think happened when I was growing up. But I'm not blaming my parents at all. I think it is a generational thing, and I think we are all in a much better position to be able to be better parents today, I think.
Yeah. So interesting you say Victorian. Isn't it weird how it feels like the 1960s, 70s, 80s, that version of parenting was actually 100 years old at that stage. In a weird way, the authoritarian idea around parenting, it sort of lasted way beyond it's born out of the Industrial Revolution, basically, isn't it? That's sort of like all that kind of like concentrated commerciality and like dominance and control and assertion of, you know, of your will. It's such an odd thing that like it persisted, and suddenly the disintegration of it and the vacuum it's kind of left has left us without those kind of natural, authentic leaders. And I think the role, particularly for guys at the moment, to understand who they are and what they're supposed to attach to is particularly off-putting, because I think women, there's a developing understanding, I think, that women's natural role nurturing humans and as like bearers of fruit, bearers of kids, like that's like that part of society, that role doesn't go away. But men's role is kind of like we can only see at the moment reflected in what's going on around us, the kind of negative outcomes of that. It's a really interesting thing to see you stepping away from what you're saying is like that kind of original rugby culture, kind of like hard man thing, and now kind of redefining yourself.
Yeah. I think
I don't know if I'm over-egging that, but yeah.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a wave of men, certainly of my generation, who definitely get it now, and you know, the people who I am friends with, they're not the super hard, you know. I find tough guys quite comical now. I mean, because clearly it's a front, isn't it? You know, nobody doesn't have fears. Nobody doesn't have you know, worries in life. You know, and if you're putting just one strong version of yourself forward to the world, then you're only getting a certain portion of that person, and therefore I think, you know, that the real strength in a man. And I've got a lovely Aboriginal friend called Jeremy Donovan, and who's just a phenomenal human being. Helped me a lot along my own journey and practically doing survival stuff, but also sort of from a spiritual perspective. And he would say a man's strength is in his tears. And I think, you know, that real strength is being able to show your emotions and not be embarrassed about it, and be able to show your vulnerabilities and just stand there as a human being and not shy away from those. And I think, yeah, now I'm not going to name names, but you know, you've got your TV programs with your very stereotypical men now, and I think they look a bit comical. I really do.
It looks silly. It was wooden.
I have to say, like, also though, it's not, you know, yes, this is like a stereotypical male thing, but I think as a parent, certainly, or, you know, even as a business owner, and you can talk to this, I don't know, but I think that you feel this too. Like, as a woman, I notice that the moments that I don't feel in control when I'm parenting, where I feel like I have a kid, he's brilliant, but he likes to push every boundary, and he needs to know where his safe edge is. And until he finds that safe edge, he's going to push and he's going to push and he's going to push. And that's great when I'm in my center. But when I'm really tired and he's woken me, you know, 7 times last night, and those kind of days when you're really tired and you've got a million other things, you're working from home and you've got your phone and all the different things that you're trying to do, and they're pushing in the background. Whenever you feel out of control, your natural instinct is to go into showy authoritarianship, is to go like, now listen here, I'm the boss, you know. And you hear this thing coming out of yourself that isn't the way that you parent in any other situation. It's not your belief system, it's just the words that you heard when you were a child coming out at you, because you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, oh, better go back to that like reflexive thing that was built into us. And that's not just male. I mean, the male element of it is coming out in the woman as well, but it's just that feeling of security and safety and sense of self, right? And those bosses, you know, in their work environments that are feeling like they're losing control of their employees, things aren't going well, they get authoritarian and they shout and they're like, you are doing this wrong and whatever. And, you know, we need to try and, you know, those are the moments, right, where we go, oh, okay, no, that wasn't great. Like in our house, we have this do-over thing where I go, if I hear myself doing that, I'll take a moment and go to my son, oh, Rubes, that wasn't great. Let's do that again. And then we'll just literally replay it the way that and we'll keep replaying it until it goes the way that, like, sometimes.
Do you ever play each other? Do you ever like, Rube, you do me and I'll do you?
Yeah, totally. And then that's really annoying because he does this really annoying voice and I'm like, that is not my voice. And then I hear my voice and then it's doubly bad. But it's just that, it's that moment of noticing, like, what happens to me when I'm not in control, and where are my belief system around it? Like, do I believe that as a parent, or just, you know, a person in the pandemic, do I believe that in order to be a good, valid, useful member of society, I have to be in control all of the time? And if I do believe that, where does that leave me now? Because most of us, like you're saying, are in this place of going, oh, I actually have that illusion of control that I thought I had for all that time it's been stripped away from me. And how do I function within a space where I've been looking for these external references to give me that feeling of control? And again, like you said, it's coming back to that inner metric of going, well, what's my inner compass, and how do I feel about every choice that I'm making and every change that I'm making, and how can I be my own guide rather than looking to these external sources?
I agree. I think you're being a bit hard on yourself, actually, because I think, you know, those times, those stressful times, is when you go into this sort of survival mode, isn't it? And like, let's face it, if someone's falling off a cliff, you're not going to be all touchy-feely. You're gonna shout. You're going to go, stop, stand back. You know, you're in an emergency scenario.
Yeah, consider your choices.
And when you're stressed like that, you go into that mode, don't you? And I think, you know, to then have the ability to step back and go, should we do that again? Because I didn't, you know, then that's great, because you've got self-awareness, you're aware of the situation, but I wouldn't beat yourself up about it. I mean, that is just natural, isn't it? That's because that is your version of, you know, a little emergency happening in your life, partly because your own tolerance level has gone down because you didn't sleep the night before or whatever, so that it's easier for anything to become that little emergency, but also because our lives are different. We don't have life and death things going on at the moment, and that it's stressful things, isn't it? It's the money worries and stuff like that that are the things that create those sort of situations. But I think, you know, what you're doing seems to be perfect. You know, do it because it's gonna happen anyway. It's like thinking, oh, I'm not gonna think bad thoughts. It's like, they're gonna come up. You just got to be aware of them and then go, okay, and then yeah, understand, and then just smiling and going, look, I apologize to my little boy all the time. Yeah, and sometimes I can shout and I really let rip at him as well, and I'm like, mate, I am so sorry, you did not deserve that. And I think kids are very resilient, and I think they just as we all know, and I'm sure I'm preaching to convert, they just massively appreciate it when you're honest and you just give them a big hug and you say sorry and like, right, let's do that again. Daddy got it wrong this time, but yeah, it sounds like you're doing amazingly.
Yeah, it's that expectation of self-awareness, like you're talking about self-awareness, that expectation that you have that some people would have, like when somebody says they're self-aware, that they're never going to fall or trip. But it's not that thing. It's how quickly you can bring it back, how quickly you recognize it, and then kind of go, oh, hang on, whoops, catch myself here.
Yeah. I mean, we've all got hang-ups, and we've all got, you know, we have all lived with a certain set of events that have happened in our lives, and we'll all have triggers as well. And let's face it, most of us haven't got the time to do so much therapy that you're going to get out all of that past conditioning, I suppose. So things are going to happen, but if you are relatively together, you're just going to spot them and smile and go, look, okay, yeah, no, I lost a bit of control there. So I don't know.
That's mildly over the edge.
I mean, I have done a fair bit of therapy in the past, but again, as a dad and a husband and stuff, you just don't have time to do the same amount of work on yourself to continue. I'd love to continue doing psychotherapy, not because it's not just to sort of revel in the whole thing, but I think it's great to continue taking steps to becoming, you know, a better version of yourself. But you know, who's got the time to do consistently, keep doing lots and lots and lots of work on yourself? And you do little bits and bobs, don't you? But yeah, just being kind to yourself, I suppose. Yeah. Just recognizing that that's normal.
Tell us about lack of time. Tell us about 2 5-month-old twins. How's that?
Do you know what? They're great. I couldn't really complain. Laura was saying last night, we go to bed. We built a double bed out of pallets at the beginning of lockdown. So we've got two king size mattresses pushed together basically, and 43 euro pallets. And so me, Ran, Molly, Millie, and my wife Laura all sleep in the same bed, which is ace, I think. Although somehow we all get squished into one time.
I was going to ask, like, yeah, do you always end up in the same places?
But I mean, she basically, because she's double breastfeeding at the moment, and whenever we go to bed about 11 o'clock, the twins latch on, and then they're asleep within 10 minutes, and she's like, how lucky are we? This is just bonkers. And then I'll sleep till 2 o'clock or whenever the next feed is. And then I have to admit, I put earplugs in, so I don't even hear that feed. But there's not that much you can do as a man when your wife is adamant about breastfeeding, and quite rightly, because she's doing really well. Yeah, no, we're really lucky as far as that's concerned. I think that the time thing just ends up being, I think it's tricky, isn't it? When, especially again, when everyone's at home and they haven't got a structure to life, and yet you have got financial worries. That's probably the main worry that people have got at the moment. Obviously, there is the COVID worry, but you know, if you're below 60 and don't have pre-existing conditions, it's not a huge worry for healthy people, I don't think. And I think it's maybe a little bit of scaremongering going on all over the place, but you know, that's just my opinion. I think, you know, financial worries do end up being probably the thing that most people are stressing about. And then it's, if you're worrying, you're not always the most efficient, are you, at doing whatever you're doing, because you're kind of half worrying and half thinking about that, and then you try and do 2 jobs at once, and then you're looking after the kids and stuff like that. So I do think, you know, I mean, my wife and I said we haven't actually done it for a little while, but during the first lockdown we basically gave each other 3 hours of the day where we could just do our own thing. So I would exercise and do a bit of work in the garden and do my emails and stuff in those 3 hours, knowing that Laura had got the family basically, and then we'd swap over so that she'd get a bit of time to herself and do her thing. And I think that's quite valuable because otherwise you're just kind of half doing so many different things that I find that quite stressful. Yeah, the days that we haven't, and actually we should probably go back to it actually, because the days where you're trying to work and look after a child at the same time, it's like, as I'm sure most listeners who've got children realize, it's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, everything ends up being second best basically. Yeah. So tell us about the garden then. You're like, I know you're doing some wilderness skills training with folk. Like, have you got a wild garden out there? What's the story?
Well, I've been reading a book called The Forest Garden, and yeah, I would love to turn our garden into a forest garden. It was quite a manicured, sort of stately sort of garden-ish. We live in a nice grange. We swapped it for a 2-bedroom flat in Battersea, but obviously the further outside of London you get, the more you can buy. And we're super lucky because during lockdown, you know, we had that sort of garden guilt that we did have a safe space to go outside and muck around and stuff like that. But you know, it's not prissy at all. I don't believe in planting flowers and stuff like that. Laura's got a great vegetable garden. We had more vegetables that we could even eat this year. It was ace. We got chickens, we got pigs, and yeah, we're just trying to create a little. I think it'd be great when as the kids are growing up, just seeing them interacting with all these animals. And we do cull the cockerels. You know, when we've got too many cockerels and you don't want too many cockerels. And we eat the eggs and all of that, and the first pig will go to the abattoir in a couple of weeks.
Okay.
And we'll eat that as well. And I think personally, it's part of the huge scaremongering of the sort of parallels anyway to the huge scaremongering around COVID is death is such a taboo subject still in our society, isn't it? And you go to indigenous cultures. Oh, you can go to Spain and you see like 5 people hanging off a motorbike or a moped or something like that. And there's more relaxed attitudes in southern Mediterranean, and then you go to South America and it's like 11 people hanging off a motorbike.
Is that how you measure the relationship to death?
And then in indigenous cultures, you know, if a mother wants a chicken to be killed, she'll point at a 4-year-old child and say, "Go and kill that chicken," and it will go and grab the machete and kill the chicken. And it's part of the cycle of life. And that's why I think that sometimes we get things out of perspective in terms of the deaths that are happening now around COVID. People have to die, and it's not incredibly sad. And you know, again, going back to my geography days, I remember studying the Reverend Thomas Malthus, who had the theory of population, which is that if an area gets overpopulated, the planet will self-control using war, famine, or disease, and I think that's what's happening. You know, you know, it's very.
We have these discussions regularly as well.
It's very tricky to have these discussions without sounding like some sort of maniac who wants to cull the human population, and it's not that at all. I'm not a maniac that wants to cull the human population, but when a virus comes in that takes out the weak people in the population, weaker people because they're the vulnerable people. You have to step back and go, look, is this a catastrophe, or is this planet self-regulating? And I'm a bit on the fence there, I have to say.
Yeah.
I think it's really, I mean, we did a podcast on death rituals and grief and approaches to grief and death around the world, precisely because of this thing where we were kind of going, well, what's the story? Like, we have this kind of, we live, and now we're all talking about wellness and how to live well. But then there's this just kind of bizarre thing where, like, death and even birth to a large degree, because birth is so close to death. In fact, in loads of ways, it's the one time in your life as a woman where you're really definitely facing a moment where you're going, well, this could go either way. And that's the reality of it, you know. Yeah. And I think what we discovered was, once death and birth got taken out of the house and got put into the hospital or the mortuary or wherever it is now, it became this taboo thing because we weren't seeing it. We just weren't being exposed to it on a daily basis. And like, I had a home birth, you know, I know lots of people who've had home births. And I think the people that you talk to whose kids have grown up seeing their brothers and sisters born at home and their sisters give birth at home, birth doesn't become this terrifying entity where people are screaming in wards and hospitals and no one really knows what's happening and there's blood and everything's terrifying. It's like, oh, this is the way it can be, and it can go this way or it can go this way, and it's just one of the bits of the cycle of life. And the same way with death. And I think now we never see someone die. I mean, who can you think of that you've seen die? Just, it doesn't happen. When I grew up in Nepal, it was a way of life. I mean, I saw people die. I've seen loads of people die when I was a kid. I saw them fall off rope bridges into the rivers. I saw them go to try and save their child while they were washing their clothes and go down the stream, you know. And then also, like you said, there were feast days. We killed goats, we blew out the intestines, we made sausages, and it was like life and death, and the whole thing was wrapped up together in this parcel. And there was also like a support structure system of the spirituality that went with that, that was giving us the structure around, like, this is what we do, these are the rituals that we do, this is how we come together, this is how we process this stuff. And I think now that we've lost all that, when we're faced with a situation like now where all we're being told in the news is this is how many people die, but we're not being told, well, how many people normally die at this time of year, and what do they normally die of? You're just hearing die. And that's all we're hearing, like, how ill are the other people, and like, is this relative to any other thing? You're just suddenly shot through the heart with this utter terror.
7 new deaths, or even 700 new deaths, whatever. Yeah,
it's terrible. Is it? I don't know. Because there's no relativism. There's just like death, and that's this terrifying thing for us. And how do we bring it back? Like, it's looking to nature, right? Isn't it? And it's a very long-winded point, but my point is really like, how do we come back to this? We go outside, we go into nature, we learn those skills, we look at the animals around us, and that's how we notice this cycle's just going on, and it's going on everywhere all the time, right? Yeah,
no, I think so too. I mean, certainly, again, going back to my Aboriginal friend, he would, you know, because they have an extraordinarily strong connection to their ground, to the land, to nature, and they would always say sort of a little prayer of gratitude if they're killing a snake or whatever they're having to kill. Because, and I remember having an argument with a vegan on Twitter about this, and I was like, look,
that's a common trope at this stage.
It's not an advisable thing to do.
No.
But yeah, my argument was that, look, we are all animals on a planet, and we're omnivores, and I don't necessarily think that we all have to stop eating animals, because I do think that there is a cycle of life, and yeah, I do think it is doing things like doing more bushcraft and going out into the woods, and you know, I'm lucky enough certainly in the survival shows I've done for Discovery Channel to have been able to live a very natural life, albeit in a sort of artifice of, you've got 10 days to survive in this country now, or this country now, and this country now. But it's been incredible, really, because I think it is, even though it's a complete artifice, isn't it? You know, you've got a television camera, and you wouldn't be doing this survival thing if it wasn't for, you know, paying the bills and, you know, all that sort of malarkey. I was still standing there, you know, in these areas with a stupid grass skirt on, going, right, okay, I need to find water, I need to find food, and then if I did catch an animal, obviously you've got to kill that animal, and you've got to go through that whole process too. And I think it has made me understand the sort of the just, I suppose, just the reality of life. And I think, you know, when you do, you know, when you think of chicken and you think of a little breast of chicken in a plastic tray with a bit of cellophane on the top of it, then you're divorced from that, aren't you?
There was a really interesting guy I was watching a YouTube of, a vegan actually, who was campaigning at a supermarket, outside a supermarket, showing people where their food was coming from.
Right.
And so people were coming out of the supermarket, and somebody complained to the police that he was, scaring the public essentially with this, these terrible videos of these cattle being kept in cages, etc. And he said, well, I mean, all I'm doing is showing them where the food and the plastic is coming from. Like, I'm not showing them something that isn't happening. It's not a horror movie. It's just the origin of their food. If they're not happy with that, then it's for them to question it. But it's not me that shouldn't be making. I'm just like showing them the thing. Like, it's just on a TV screen. I'm not telling them a story out of my own head. Like, it's the supermarket that made it. Like, essentially, I'm just showing the supermarket's ads for them, And the police were like, they're really stuck, right? Because they're like, okay, here's a vegan basically showing that if people can't eat meat, they shouldn't eat meat, which is, if they can't cope with the idea of the death of the thing, that they shouldn't really be eating it, which is totally true. And they were confronted themselves. Look, they're like, what is he doing wrong? They're like, they just didn't. And he was so good at talking. He talked them around in absolute circles. But it was cool because I was like, cool. I think that's really the level that we should be at. It's not like, and I don't usually have a lot of agreeing moments with, hardcore veganism for the planet. I don't, there's a lot of science that gets very misconstrued around this stuff. But I think if we have vegans who are showing meat eaters, this is where your meat's coming from, can you eat it now? And the meat eaters go like, okay, I can or I can't. That's the barometer, really, isn't it? Because then you're showing them the life and the death and the process, and like, are you willing to still be involved in this process?
Yeah, and that's the divorce, isn't it? It's not seeing the death, not being a part of the killing, and therefore being divorced from the concept of that being a living animal previously. But I mean, it's the same with water coming out of the tap and the appreciation that you just take it for granted, don't you? It's the same as living with lighting and heating and stuff like that. I think that, yeah, for me, that it's the, when you do have to do it all from scratch without even a tent or a knife or anything like that, then you appreciate all these things so much, and understand how lucky we are. But to the point where we're now slightly crippled by the fact that we're so lucky that it's like being an overly privileged child or something, isn't it? Really, you've got too much handed to you on a plate, therefore you don't understand the real world. And I think that's, as a society, that's probably where we are.
I'm also terrified of it getting taken away. That's the main thing. We're like, oh, we need all the toys. Yeah. Keep all the toys in here, And I think that's, the fear of not having. And then, but like you think, I mean, I know it. I was like talking to my kid, made up this game yesterday. He was like, Mom, I really want to play this game. Let's get it with a dartboard. Let's write like good things and bad things. I think he was calling them consequences. He was like, let's write consequences. And then whatever number you hit on the dartboard corresponds to some consequence that we've written here. And like, I was like, okay, cool. So we've made all the numbers from the dartboard and we wrote them down on a piece of paper. And I was like, okay, let's fill them in then. And the first one, he was like, I get to buy a little toy from Smith's toy store. I was like, okay, little is like the operative word in that sentence, but okay. And then he's like, run around the garden barefoot 3 times, or put maple syrup in someone's shampoo. I was like, nah, not that one. And we were going down the thing, but his one that he was most excited about was go camping. Right. And I was like, well, it's a kind of a bit cold, like it's snow here, it's a bit cold to go camping. He was like, no, but we can just take the tent and make a fire and roast the marshmallows. And you're like, but all of us remember that. All of us remember that the most exciting thing from our childhood was not the, My Little Pony dream castle that we got for Christmas. It was the time that we went camping with our parents and we roasted the marshmallows over the fire. We made the fire and we told the stories and we all slept in one room. Yeah. We have nothing. Yeah. We just had the tent and our parents sleeping beside us.
I know, it's lovely, isn't it? I did that with my little boy. We went to the Peak District on Christmas Eve. I think it might have been the day before Christmas Eve, and it was snowing on the way up there, and it was just like utterly ridiculous. And because we went wild camping basically. He's 3 years old, and how wild camping is sort of out of sight, out of mind. It's not strictly legal, but it's tolerated. And so we parked in this bit of the Peak District, and everybody that we met round was like, we're going camping, and I've got a big rucksack on my back, because obviously if you're camping with a 3-year-old, you've got to be comfortable, so we've got to have a tent and decent sleeping bags and stuff. So I've got this ridiculous rucksack on my back carrying everything. He's going, we're going camping. And then we found a little spot that we thought was a little bit past about 4 signs that said no camping, and then
this isn't exactly the ninja camping moment of your dreams, is it?
Yeah, and then we can't put the tent up yet because it wasn't dark, and there were still people walking up and down the trail, so we had to wait till the last light, and we cooked bananas and custard, and then he actually fell asleep at about 6:30, and I was like, this is amazing. He's absolutely sparkoed in the tent, and then he woke up at 11, was awake till about 4. But we were having such a good time. At one point he was in my sleeping bag, and I don't know, and it was an ordeal, and yet we'll both look back on it. It was such fun memories that, you know, it was just that day we were gibbering in the tent all night long, trying to stay warm together and trying to think of things to do, and then getting the little stove going in the middle of the tent. And I just genuinely, it's a bit of a self-congratulatory pat on the back, but I loved doing that as a dad. I thought it was so important. And yeah, in terms of going back to your point, that I also used to be an expedition leader for gap year kids going on expeditions, and you'd see them come into the jungle again with all their hair dryers and shampoo and conditioner and all of this at the beginning of a 3-month gap year sort of package into the jungle, and then, you know, by the end of it, they're all just feral, but having such an amazing time, and they've not got any of the trappings of the everyday world, and they're literally just in completely stained, horrible clothing, and just have, and all of them have had the time of their life, and they've not had phones, and they've not had any of the TV or anything like that, and they've all had almost without exception, they've all had the best 3 lives that the best 3 months that they've ever had, with nothing, you know, and living next to nature in the jungle, sleeping in hammocks, washing in rivers. So yeah, well, I'm a big advocate of that, as you well know. I mean, I'm an ambassador for the Scouts, and we're doing, if you don't mind me saying, over the course of this lockdown, we're doing forest skills lessons on YouTube. We're doing live lessons every 10 o'clock every weekday on the online bushcraft YouTube channel, and it's just to encourage people to get out and spend more time outdoors, really. Yeah. What
age kind of group is it aimed at?
I think we want it to be open to everybody. There is invariably, there's not a lot of bushcraft you can do without a knife, and we do want to be cooking stuff over fires and stuff. So I think it's open to everyone, but it's the idea is that they're with their parents. I think that is probably the best way to put it. And it's hopefully, you know, it's not going to encourage children to burn their parents' houses down on their own. That would be a disaster. Or cut their fingers off. That would also be a disaster. But it's open for everyone. It's a sort of forest, you know, it's in the same vein as forest schooling is hopefully increasing in popularity, and it's been sort of bubbling around for about the last 15 years, hasn't it? But I think weirdly with this pandemic, it's been one of the positives is this sort of national yearning to reconnect with the outdoors and learn more skills, and there's only so many dog walks you can go on, you know, and I think if you don't have any skills, you can just go on a walk and then you have to come home again. But I think it's given people the ability to know that I don't know, if they can just pack enough stuff to be comfortable for overnight, or they can light fires, or they can, you know, all sorts of, they can forage, lots of different stuff. And I think that's important, because then you can be comfortable for longer outdoors, and then you end up spending more time outdoors, and that's when life starts getting better in my
Great. So it's like the right version of survival, not the one where you build a basement and fill it with baked beans and guns.
No,
we don't like that. Not
the prepper one. No.
That sounds brilliant. I mean, and it's also embracing the ideas of community. And like you're saying, bonding moments don't happen in front of the TV. You know, it's the same for me as a kid as well. Like, weirdly, I remember having, like, one of the biggest memories for me as a kid is being in this little place in West Cork, down with our old Toyota Corolla on the beach, and having tuna sandwiches out of that whilst on the beach. It was a cold, you know, one of those like Irish summer's days, and all we did was, like, it was super simple, and it wasn't because it was tasty food, but there's obviously something in that, because I was tiny. I mean, like, it's a memory from when I was, I'd say, 5 or 4, but there's obviously enough in that for like 30 whatever years later for that to have persisted as a really happy memory, for that to be like a formative thing, and for people to be able to know that they're going to have something to reflect on, because we're all looking at memories. Like yesterday, I was looking for photos to do an Instagram post, and I kept flicking past these things that made me feel immense, like you know, little holiday moments, little walks, food things that we'd shared, and those are big deals. And we're thinking about our kids now and what they're having to live through, and you know, there's a pervasive amount of fear around. To be able to like inject like moments of really like good formative community based, like, you know, bonding and contact moments with their parents, I think is so important. So fair dues, that's a great timing for this thing. Fair dues.
Yeah, and I think also it's about us not feeling like the world has been reduced to this tiny thing where like all the joy is being sucked out of it, right? It's like going, yes, okay, like amazing to travel to the Amazon and to live in Nepal and all these things that we did, that we were lucky enough to do, but also that there's this whole world of joy right where we live, and that we have access to it. And just because certain things have been taken away, actually it's given us the freedom and opportunity to look at what's right outside and go, oh, well, actually the really, really important moments, they're not the things to do with getting on the planes and going out and going to clubs and pubs and all those things. It's the things that we still have all this access to. It's just rediscovering those moments of joy within our days that are free.
And I think sometimes that, especially when it's cold and wet outside, the comfort actually gets in the way, doesn't it? You know, the central heating is the worst thing in the world, because it makes you not want to go outside. And literally when I ran on that little wild camping thing, everyone's, are you nuts? And I'm like, what? He's not going to die. We're sleeping in really warm sleeping bags. You know, he's going to be fine. But, it's that concept that you would want to make yourself uncomfortable, and I think maybe that is why they're so memorable, because then that makes you feel a little bit more alive, doesn't it? Because you can feel the elements, you can feel discomfort, but that you're feeling something. When you're watching telly, you're not feeling anything, are you? You're completely zoned out, unless it's The Notebook or something, and then you're tearing up. But it's I don't know. I think it's the visceral experiences in life, and they don't have to be good. They can potentially be arduous as well. And I think, you know, if you're going through that, you're probably learning something as well. So that's another positive, because you're becoming a better version of yourself, because you're learning how to cope with adversity, which is obviously a positive as well. So yeah, no, I think it's little doses of not being comfortable is very helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%.
Listen, this has been amazing, man.
Really exciting. I'm so glad we had this chat.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. Yeah.
We were so lucky that Nuzest were able to connect us, and we knew that it would already look like, we know you're our type of people straight away. And
thank you very much.
Oh man, like, I mean, it's great to see somebody who's like role models, who are doing, you know, engaging in authentic kind of like human behavior and willing to explore and candidly explore their own internal world and give it to other people, can only be useful right now. I think that's it. Just takes down all the barriers, which is what's needed. So fair dues. I think you're doing a really good thing. So thank you.
Thank you, mate. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's been lovely chatting. So yeah, thank you for having me on.
Brilliant. And we shall just finish with saying thank you to our sponsors, to Nuzest, for connecting us, our fantastic nutritional partners who produce the most ethically grown, sustainably packaged and recycled plastic, really, really high grade, vegan, organic, your own pea protein, and also all the other nutritionals that they do as well. And also then Clear Light Saunas, our infrared sauna partner, who it's great to have an infrared sauna partner, by the way, Ed. You should definitely get yourself one.
We'll hook you up.
If you don't, you should. Or if you haven't, you should. And also to Swivel, who are the people who brought us this fantastic little robot that we get to record on. So with that, we will say goodbye, and thank you very much for watching, and thanks very much, Ed, and see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye-bye, mate.